Welcome, one and all, throughout time and space for this episode of Weebs on the Weekends, the podcast where we break down the anime news highlights of the week and give a retrospective look on an anime that premiered 10 years ago. This episode, we will cover the highlights for all of July 2022, as we are in the third week of this month, and after which we will give our thoughts on whether to resurrect or rebury the 2012 anime franchise Robotics Notes. And this is also to continue our studio highlight of Production IG throughout the year 2012. So, again, my name is Sam Martinez. I'm a part-time weeb, full-time automail mechanic, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Jay Johnson, part-time weeb, full-time English language sensei. So, timecodes, descriptions, and for you YouTube listeners, remember that the full... if you want to get the full Sam and Jay Weeb on the Weekends experience, definitely follow us on Spotify, Google Play, and iTunes to listen to the entire podcast. And we will be going into our studio spotlight with this work known as Robotics Notes. And before I get into it, Jay, were you familiar with this work at all before having to watch it for this episode?
Not at all, because I had not seen Steins Gates before, that we talked about with Jackson on a previous special guest episode, and this is somewhat in the same world. And also, even looking into Mecha that we talked about for our top 10 Mecha episode, this did not come across that background search either. So yeah, I had no idea this even existed.
I would say in my time for Mecha, I've seen stills for it. I've at least seen the name a couple times, but I did not partake in it. This was my first exposure to it as well. So it's going to be very, very interesting getting both of our takes on this. And just to give a synopsis of the anime, then to give a little bit background of its publication, as well as going into where it's streamed. This story, we follow both Kaito and Akihito being childhood friends at high school where, I'm sorry, not Akihito, but Akiho. Akiho Senomiya, she is heading the robotics club that her older sister had started 8 years prior, where the focus or the goal of the robotics club was to build a life-size version of Gunvarel, which is from a popular TV show in that time, which is sort of a mix of Ultraman or some of the Super Sentai episodes or shows which it's basically focusing on a giant robot, sort of like if you're an older American, like the Big Guy and Rusty show that came on WB Kids. And in this series, we are following them. I believe this is their sophomore year, junior year, where those two, they're the only ones in the club, and they have a hangar dedicated to their club where they have the parts of the mecha that are there from the pre-existing members. And again, Akiho wants to revive the club and get everybody interested in building this sort of monument to sort of give hope for all who wants justice and all who are giant robot fanatics. And in pleading with the vice principal in order to get the money and the funds that they need to get the robots test ready, or at least display ready for the Japanese expo that is happening in their town within the next year or so. Again, she gives her like a billing proposal or a budget proposal, and in order to get the funds that they need, the vice principal wants them to win a sort of local tournament, which is known as, I believe it was the Battle 1 or the robot one, where they basically have hobby robots where you fight other hobby robots in order to showcase your school's prowess in robotics. It's very much reminds me of the robotics teams here in the States. Oh my goodness, I forget what it's called. I forget what the phrase of it is. It's something along those lines where it's like build something or battle something, where you're basically given this box of parts and you have to make a robot that can perform a task, which is take a couple of marbles from one end. No, you have to take a couple marbles like 50 meters, going over obstacles and things of that nature. So it's very, very interesting seeing them go along these lines. And we also see Kaito, which is her partner at this time, who is sort of lackluster about the club. He's mainly there because she allows him to play a video game without berating him too much. And along the way, they bring other people into the fold, as well as starting to unravel a mystery, mainly in regarding to a video game, regarding to the video game that Kaito is playing, which oddly enough is about giant robots. And this work, again, is a Studio IG work, the highlight that we're talking about. The source was a visual novel. The genre is drama, mystery, sci-fi. Themes are mecha, school, and the rating is PG-13, as well as it can be seen on Crunchyroll and Funimation. Now, Jay, going into this, what were your thoughts on it? Did it seem realistic at all, in the sense of having like a robotics club? I guess, like, were you aware of clubs like that in school, where your school had like a robotics team that competed in competitions such as this, or along these lines?
Yeah, it seems to be pretty standard nowadays. Stuff, specifically for the development of STEM research. STEM being
Mm-hmm.
science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and that a lot of schools do lean into like Lego robotics
Mm-hmm.
specifically for Lego Mindstorm, which has become a lot more accessible over the past couple of years. The same thing as with introduction programming classes in Python, C++, HTML, and JavaScript. So yeah, it's completely a realistic story, and again, that focusing on something that is very niche, I think, because a lot of school slice of life anime does delve into the stereotypical schools of like, oh, a athletics club or a photography club or something like that, akin to that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting to take the approach of something that's wholly like engineering focused, because you never get the sense that they're grasping at straws, that they are, well, one, she's Akiho is the main engineer essentially, but she is lacking other members in the club that would be responsible for building the necessary components of the robot.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's not too much of a stretch. Again, with, from an audience standpoint, we know that Gundams exist, or we're familiar enough with the concept that that is something that we can say that high schoolers might dream about, especially if they have, the pre-established anime in their childhood to say, oh yeah, I want to build a Iron Man suit, or I want to build a Gundam. So it was very much realistic in that approach of that she's the kind of person that is a go-getter and passionate, and she has an older sister who was an engineer as well. And again, that's what the whole premise is, that she's carrying on the heritage that her sister established. She doesn't want that thing that her sister built to go away.
Yeah.
And her childhood friend essentially is along for the ride, but it isn't in a condescending kind of way. He's a pragmatist, and that way of thinking balance out the two, like the dreamer and the realist. So I very much like their dynamic, because he's lackluster, but he's kind of apathetic in the way of, he's apathetic in the encouraging kind of ways, like grounding her inside of
Mm-hmm.
her delusions of greatness, essentially. But also, the 3 episodes go by very quickly, establishing, but oh, here's the inciting incident. The club is going to close. Here's the arrangement between the club and the school that they need to win the tournament. And then they get a third member essentially at the end who's a real, knowledgeable in the fighting games, essentially losing to or winning to Kaito against in the tournament that they go into in the second episode. So it's a very easy premise to get on board with, and easy to sell to people.
No, definitely. And just to go back to what I was saying before, the name of the robotic competition that I was participating in, it was called First Robotics. So something along those lines. And I would say again with what you said, the 3 episode test, it really did pass for me. And I'm not gonna lie, it made me want to give another show the a current show that came out recently, A Mime Warriors, at the Borderline, a better shot. I don't know why, but like for me recently, a lot of newer mecha animes I haven't been able to give their due credit. I guess mainly because I'm just a little bit gun shy. It's like I don't want to get invested just to get shut down or disappointed in some of the newer mecha anime. For instance, with this one, I can see myself continuing to watch it to see how the world unfolds, things of that nature, because it does it in a in a very good way. For instance, they bring on the third person who has the technical and robotic knowledge that Kiho is missing, and he has just as much fervor for the robotics that she has, but it's more of like a closeted type thing. And it's just funny seeing somebody like Akiho getting the resources that she needs while having the spirit and determination that she has. Like, she really is, as you said, very driven and very motivated, but she inherited the resources that her sister has. And we also see some tension between her and her sister, or at least we are given glimpses of tension. We're not really sure why they are estranged from one another, but it definitely is very interesting going in that route. And it seems like we can't get away from video games. It's like the last 3 episodes, we've talked about people who are extremely good at video games, and Kaito is no slouch in regards to video games. So in his game Kill Ballad, where you get to play as a giant robot and fight other robots, he is considered fifth in the nation. And he had a match against the video game's creator. And he now has a link to the creator, and that's how they were able to program their own robot, because he's very good at his hand-eye coordination, and Akiho wanted him to be their operator. So rather than having him relearn the controls for their little robot, they programmed the robot to the controls of the video game that he had. So he was able, showing that they were able to play into his strengths in that way. And I can see that moving forward, where as they're building their team, they are building into each other's strengths. And that is a good way to support and maintain your team, is by playing into their strengths. And Jay, I have to ask you, when you saw the images for Kill Ballad, did you get virtual on or custom Robo vibes? Because that's all I could think about every time the screen had Kaito playing his game.
Right, because there is a clear line they're drawing between what they're building and Gunpla. Again, like, you're more of the Gunpla aficionado than I am, but yeah, it's essentially a familiar design to the robotics that the Gundam robotics, or the medic, the mechanical aesthetic that we know and familiar with, to translate it over pretty well into like what they're doing. So it's the kids version of what you expect like a war machine would be doing, because they're not building weapons of mass destruction, they're just building toys, giant toys essentially. So again, like, the custom robot aesthetic custom robot aesthetic is like definitely that, because that aesthetic is just Lego blocks essentially built
Mm-hmm.
together. So I very much did like that they're not taking this into like the whole mecha genre. So I think that's why this didn't really show up for mecha when I looked for it previously, because they're not really leading into like what mecha is. This feels like more of the slice of life school kind of anime, just built around robotics. Even in the first episode, you get a in media res introduction or opening that you show that they're going to eventually get it working. So I like
Mm-hmm.
that aesthetic to the 3 episode ruling, is that they show you a little bit ahead of what they're going to actually uh, they set the goal ahead, like, oh, they do succeed, but how do they get there? Because there's a lot of interesting concepts that they flesh out in the first 2 episodes. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, Sam. But there's also an affliction that both of the main MCs have that makes it a very interesting sci-fi story, especially when you consider like how Gundams experiment with new types and how their
Mm-hmm.
special cognitive abilities go into piloting Gundams or mechs.
No, definitely. As you said, the medical affliction. So one of them that was interesting to me was the affliction that Kiho has, which is known as elephant mouse syndrome, where when she overworks herself and she overtaxes her body, she not necessarily seizes up. She has a similar reaction to. It reminds me of like those fainting goats, right? Where you scare them, they just lock up and they just like fall over, but apparently with her, when she freezes up, it's as though there was like she experiences a lot of ping. I guess like if you wanted to talk about it in video game uh, definitions, where she has a lot of lag and she is experiencing 5 minutes in 1 second, right? It that was at least the explanation that I got, and it was just very interesting that she had this. Like that was all the information that we were given, and as far as Kaito's condition, at first I thought he was diabetic, but then it seems like when he is sleep deprived, he also has something similar to elephant mouse syndrome as well, whereas time just sort of stands still, and he is, or at least with him, 1 second is 5 minutes, and he can't really do anything about it, but he is just hyper aware of everything at the same time, and it takes a huge toll on him. So, as you said before, Jay, it seems like playing into the stereotypical new types where you can be more aware of your surroundings or more aware of things. It seems like they may be playing into that with these two characters and their affliction. Um, I would say, what were some of the other themes that you had noticed going on? Because you had mentioned them earlier, but I'm not as wrinkly brained as you. So if you were, because I'm sure like you wanted to at least mention one or two of them that you have noticed.
Right. Because, I mean, it's just like refreshing
Mm-hmm.
in one perspective of having a male and female lead. And I think that's kind of that goes into why this has so much going on to it. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know how I feel about it or how it's going to really roll out. It's like very much of a, this might become interesting in my it might become interesting in my estimation. Like, not sure if
Yeah.
they actually know what they're doing right now in these first 3 episodes, but it's the way that you have a male and female lead and their childhood friends, and you're like, oh, that's a perfect setup for a romance. But one, it doesn't have the genre tag, and never
Yeah.
is the anime directed in a way that makes you think they either have feelings for each other or romantic feelings for each other. So again, that might change, but it was really refreshing for these first 3 episodes. Like, these two
Yeah,
are
that they
just going,
were actual friends.
yeah, I know, right? Surprise. And like, it's so refreshing to see that. It's like they stand on equal settings. Like I said, they have a good yin and yang kind of balance to them, and then even their inflictions, which they do say is a result of an incident that happened 7 years ago.
Mhm.
So like that's some mystery elements to it, maybe some sci-fi elements to it, but yeah, that their afflictions are parallel to each other. Like what you were talking about is like she has spasms. I guess that would be the more medically correct terminology of it. Is that, and then he has some kind of time distortion affliction for like perceiving things at a higher rate. So again, not leading into like this is going to be a Gundam thing and that he's going to go into combat, but the idea that that aids him in, you know, in his action video game helps him process things a lot faster. And like he would have won the tournament essentially, but there is like kind of a meandering kind of glossing over that he lost. But with that, I just found again like refreshing and so the interesting way to put it, because her dynamic with him and his dynamic with her feels to be like what's going to carry the, you know, group dynamic. Again, like you say, they're going to go around collecting people, like, you know, with motion. There's going to be a mechanic dude, like, you know, the whole archetypes with Gundam teams and like the whole everyone has a specialty. Like this is the weaponeer, and this is the mechanic, and this is the tech guy, and this is the, you know, whatever. So anyways, but yeah, I just like that kind of element that they established these two as like the main core of the group, and then they're going to slowly expand to include other people, because the introduction of the third member, I think his name is Subaru, but he goes Subaru to the tournament under
Pleiades.
Under Mr. Pleiades, because he's not supposed to be doing what he's doing, and Akito or Kaito basically blackmails him into joining the club, because that circumvents what the school said about them winning the tournament, because he's a student or he's a classmate of the two. So it's like, okay, so that's a roundabout way, but it shows clever writing on their part, and that he has some kind of, the third member, Subaru, has a discrimination, or he's dealing with some kind of discrimination to why he can't be openly engaging in these robot battles. So that also says something about maybe the society or his family life, which again is enough interest of his character to maintain that introduction. So yeah, that was interesting enough, as well as what was the other thing I want to talk about? Oh, I want to talk about how it is just cleanly animated. So like again, like 2012 animation, like we talked about a couple times. We talked about with the Berserk movie, but how sometimes it can be really janky. But with Production IG, and like why we're doing a spotlight, is like their animation doesn't really show age to it at all. And I was very surprised with like somewhat of a mecha is that it was going to show, because that's where it readily shows in, you know, looking at past animations, like how mechas move inside of space or how they walk, essentially, because sometimes corners have to be cut with motion animation. The same thing as with, there's no clear signs of the connection between this and Steins Gate or Chaos Head, which is the other Chaos series. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to how that connection builds, if there is one.
Yeah, now that you mention it, because when they start out with, I forgot what the name of it is. You know, that clock in Steins Gate that has like those tubes with the numbers in it? It starts out with that as well. So now I can see like that's just like a visual link or a visual cue to it. So maybe like that number is supposed to tell us like where in time it's relative to Steins Gate. However, just to go back to when the romantic theme that you had mentioned, their relationship, it reminded me of you've seen the movie Belle, haven't you?
Yes.
So you remember the main character and her friend, I think he was part of the basketball club?
Yes.
So their dynamic reminds me of their dynamic so much, mainly because spoilers in Belle, or mild spoilers, I suppose, because one character feels like they have to play the role of mother to the other character because of the traumatic incident, right? And we see that a little bit in Kaito, where he feels responsible to Akiho, and we see that in the flashback, her older sister says, "Hey, take care of her," right? And I think that's why he's so pragmatic to her, and he's not really cold or anything like that, but he's just straight to the point. He doesn't give her any fluff about it, because he doesn't want her to get hurt. But he's also very supportive. We see him sort of do like this sweet bun bet in order to get information to help her uh, get the haggling leverage that she needs in order to get the parts for the robot competition. And he even goes out of his way to blackmail Subaru so that they can get him to be on the team. So he does support her, and it's just very, very interesting and cool to see him do that, because even though, as you said, he seems apathetic, he does have his cool moments. And just moving forward, I can see Subaru and Akiho, like once Subaru like accepts himself for who he is, I can see those two just really, really gelling, because she Akiho is just all enthusiastic and is spirited about everything that is robot and fantastical, hopes and dreams, things like that. She even wanted to put a cannon on the robot for aesthetics, right? And Kaito's like, we don't need a cannon if it's like, what do we need? It's like, is aesthetics or results more important? That sort of thing. Whereas Subaru, I can see him be like, if we can put a cannon on there that actually does stuff, because he has a pylon pusher on his robot to help give the robot reach. So if Akiho wants a cannon, Subaru would have pushed his glasses up as like, I can totally do that. And talking about glasses, like she does like a sort of like glasses aside thing, like any Chunbyo would do. I guess she's like, as he would say, she would put the glasses on and she would make some sort of comment. So I want to know like who she's talking about, whether or not it's a character from Gunvarel or if it's somebody else. So that would be interesting. And another thing that, or at least something that surprised me, that shouldn't really be surprising, because we did an episode, we talked about it in Space Brothers, was the organization JAXA. I thought, again, in Space Brothers, I thought JAXA was just a anime only organization, but it seems like JAXA is an actual organization, much like how CERN is an actual organization, because we see them saying that they're going to go to JAXA for more support, for more manpower in order to make the robot that they want to make. So that was a big revelation for me, that JAXA was an actual thing. Real quick question, Jay, before we go on to our final results and tallies. Were you aware of JAXA's actual existence?
Yes, it's spelled JAXA, and we talked about it in this first brother episode. Is that the Japanese flight program, or space flight program, because they work with NASA in great detail, because they don't really actually have any spacecrafts, so that they use the NASA launch sites in the U.S. to launch their spacecrafts or any orbital missions that they have. So yeah, it is a long-term standing thing, and we just talked about that a while ago, or I guess outside the episode, because like it was like after 10 years with Space Brothers, like the government just announced that they were planning a manned mission next year in 2023. So yeah, it's very interesting that it comes up again, and they're making enough efforts. And again, I think it's one of those things of that anime sponsorships, whenever they make a call out to JAXA, is that they give money to support endeavors like this.
Okay, no, that would be cool. I feel like I feel like if somebody was an actual, well, not an actual, I feel like some of them are anime fans, like if they realized that a certain company had gave them money, or a certain anime franchise helped finance a mission, that they would try to get like some sort of logo or something on their suit, to show silent support of the franchise. Say like, I don't know, if Sunrise Studios gave them some money, maybe like a unicorn logo or something like that, or a Gundam outline or a patch on their suit would be kind of cool. But at least like a silence, like a callback to the franchise, saying, "Hey, thank you for helping me get here." That sort of thing. That would be interesting. So along to wrap things up, um, and you can give your final thoughts as well in giving your results. We had talked and given some high praise on the 3 episodes. But Jay, does this pass the 3 episode test for you, and does it deserve a revive or rebury?
Right, because those are two separate questions. If something is good and is it worth recommending? Because something can be good and not be worth recommending, and something could be bad and then be worth recommending as well. Because it's very interesting inside of the 3 episode test that we do that we gave Steingate's, the full season review, and the problem with Steingate, specifically for me, is that the first half only only is justified by the second half, and it's a slog to get through. So I wouldn't recommend the first 3 episodes of Steins Gate, but I do recommend the series if you can make it through, I guess. Or it's a good series, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. But
yeah,
I feel like with this, it is so average, I can't recommend it. So it does pass the 3 episode test because it does give you a clear inciting incident, as well as beginning in media res by showing you that there is a end goal that they're going to reach, and just how do you get there. So it has a intrigue or mystery, or at least a through line that you can follow, as well as the strong characters and the humor. Forgot to mention that. Like you did mention that as well with the Chibio.
Yeah, the glasses and yes, the weebish moments.
Yeah, she takes, and like even she has exaggerated movements, and it really like stands out because of Kaito's kind of sluggish, kind of Shikamaru kind of air about him when he moves.
She's a funny man, he's a straight man.
Yeah, but also like he's kind of weird because he has like a gun holster kind of thing for his phone.
Yes, like I forgot to mention that. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so like he's a nerd by himself, but you don't really see him interact too much with other people, except for like the bun incidents with like the convenience shop owner. But yeah, it's like it's so average and it's so well done. I don't know if anything stands out as extraordinary to make it a recommendation to me. So I think it's going to be one of those things that I'll watch it. I'll watch it myself, but not sure if there's enough intrigue to it that I would say, oh, they're like, if they maybe introduce the sinister organization that eventually probably is going to introduce itself, like how it did with Steins Gate, then I would recommend it. But the same way that I wouldn't recommend Steins Gate off the first 3 episodes, I wouldn't recommend Robotic Notes. So it's a rebury for me.
Okay. So 3 episode pass and a reservation rebury. I can see that. And like for me, it definitely passes the 3 episode test, as you said. It's just very refreshing. I don't know if it's because I think it is largely because of their interactions with each other, Kaito and Akiho. And as you said, like they're both nerds in their own right. Whereas Akiho, she's more open about it. Like she does it in person in front of other people. Like even when they are doing the business meetings with the vice principal, she does like an aside thing where she pulls up her glasses and he's like, yo, now's not the time for that. But we would see Kaito bring his nerd out like whenever anybody wants to ask him something. So like, sure, if you can beat me and kill Ballad first, like that sort of thing where he's just being cheeky about it. But it's also his way of trying to get other people into his into his fandom, because it seems as though like it's a very very small niche people. I would say that we are given some stuff in the beginning, or at least like near the end of episode 3, because we see as they are coming back from their competition in Tokyo, we see that a celebrity has moved to town. And from what I've seen online, it seems as though that may have been the creator of Kill Ballad, and she had figured out who Kaito was. So that will be interesting to see their dynamic grow and change as well. But for me, I would say like it passes the 3 episode test, and I think I would recommend it. Just because I would resurrect it, just because of how average it is. It's not necessarily too wild, too wacky, or too zany. I would say I guess the most zany part of it would be Subaru dressing up as Pleiades for the robotic competition. And I feel like if they did focus on the robotic competition a little bit more, at least like gave it a few more episodes rather than the one episode they did, that might have been good. But I guess like depending on the pacing of the rest of the anime, that's left to be seen. But I would still resurrect it and recommend it to people because I feel like this would be a good litmus test for people who, or at least to introduce people to mechas or to slice of life type anime because it's it's at a good pace where the characters, they're written fairly solid and you can see their influence on another, and again it's just very even and it's well done. So that's, without repeating myself once more, that those are my thoughts on that. So it's another split decision on the resurrection or the rebury, but we had agreed on the 3 episode test. And to wrap things up, that was our review on Robotics Notes, the production IG work. And if you want to continue following us on our studio highlights, be on the lookout for our next production IG work, which is a big favorite of Jay's, which is Psychopaths. That will be our next studio spotlight episode. However, if you would like to follow us on our normal schedule, be on the lookout for our next anime, which we would be looking into the daily life of the female version of Gladstone Gander in the anime Good Luck Girl. Now, Jay, with that being said, what have you got for us today?
All right, so returning to a game about some Price is Rights. Have to guess the actual, or at least the closest, where do we want to go? Yeah, let's see if you can get the closest to the actual value of how much do you think it would take to build the first Gundam in actual real life?
Ooh. Okay, so, and we're talking about a Gundam that can fly, shoot guns.
We're talking about the first Gundam, which is the RX-78.
Let's go with 200 million.
Wow.
USD.
Man, you're lowballing the creation of mobile suits, my guy.
Dang
but
it.
Yes. But according to the look at that, JAXA, or the Japanese space program, as well as DARPA. So there was a cross consultation between this in 2008. The current 2008 cost would have been $728 million.
Ah! Dang it!